Today I'm breaking down a commercial I directed during quarantine. It was the hardest project I've ever worked on, and the hardest I've ever worked on any project, partly due to it being shot in lockdown right in this small space that you can see right behind me, and it was also kind of a dream project. So let's roll the video and I'll see you back here in a minute.
Hit it! From the beginning.
Welcome back, hope you enjoyed that. My name's Ka-Lok, by the way. I'm a creative director and consultant. And a quick note, if you're here to see production behind the scenes, then this video's probably not for you. I wanted to share some of the thinking behind the decisions that went into this commercial because, well, I love this type of content, and you often see finished work, but rarely a peek into the hundreds of decisions before anything cool happened. And I think it's this less glamorous thinking part that's the most important if you want to create not just cool work, but effective work. So hopefully the takeaway will be some insight into how I go about taking business goals and turning it into a creative output that's still relevant for a brand. I'll put timestamps down the side here if there's a specific section in the video that you want to jump into, but otherwise, let's dive in. So Art2Play are makers of luxury playing cards and have a store creating puzzles, games, and high-end curious objects, essentially all things that make you go, huh. They've been a long-time client, but I was already a fan of the brand before that, and 13-year-old me, obsessed with magic and playing cards, would have been very excited knowing that future him would go on to direct this. So where do you even begin with a project like this? The goals. It sounds so obvious, but it's the most important part of the entire process. Every creative decision should be filtered through this lens. When it's a commercial project, you have to remember that we're not here to make art for the sake of art. I do think commercial work can be art, which is going to have to be a debate that we save for another day. There is a commercial goal that's the priority here, and the best that I've heard it put is that it's art serving capitalism. So what I like to do is immediately write down the goals as big as possible on a whiteboard, because inevitably when you or your team start working on creative concepts, you are going to lose yourself in coming up with original ideas, and you kind of lose track of whether or not it even aligns with any objectives. It literally always happens. And it's right here that it's the disconnect between creatives and marketing or the client. Generally, marketing are trying to hit a business goal, and creatives are typically trying to bring an artistic vision to life. So how I approach it is by measuring every creative decision to make sure it's always in service of those goals. The goals of this specific project was to be a brand awareness piece acting as a hero video for Art2Play's collection of playing cards. They wanted to focus on the custom designs with the messaging that these aren't your average cards, all whilst feeling premium and playful, which is their tone of voice. And aside from being a commercial, they wanted this video to have rewatch value for their current owned audience. Otherwise, that was essentially the entire brief I was given, and I was given a lot of creative freedom to play a bit on this, but those goals became the frame and filter for every idea going forward. This is the flowchart that lived in my head as I was making all the decisions. What's the point of this sequence or shot? Does it highlight the design? Is it premium? Is it playful? Is it ownable? What I mean by that is, does it feel generic? Is it product focused? Is it delightful? This is just a personal idea that I'm obsessed with, which I'll get to a bit later. And finally, if you hit pause, does it still work as a still image? That last one wasn't a client request, it was just something I decided to add, which made my life so much harder. But like I said, this was a bit of a dream project, so I got a bit personally invested in making this just as sick as possible. I thought it'd be super cool if someone could pause at any point and have it work just as well as a photo. But did it work? The message for this video was not your average playing cards. These are not cards like you've ever seen before, and that's exactly how the idea came about, to shoot the playing cards like no one has seen before. And the basic idea was like a title sequence where we dive into the world of playing cards, bringing each deck to life through art direction, animation, and movement that was all informed by the designs of the cards. I'll break down the opening sequence and why it's structured the way it is, and I'll refer it back to that flowchart that I just showed you. A few things I wanted to keep in mind. It needed to be immediately striking. It needs to immediately communicate what we're looking at. And if someone was to watch this as a skippable pre-roll ad, it has to engage them and intrigue them enough to stay. So this specific deck was chosen to open the entire video because it literally has the words playing cards right on the front. Because I know from personal experience, for people who aren't familiar with custom playing cards, when they see something like this, they look at it and think, oh, it's a fancy packet of cigarettes. And that's not the first impression we're after. So I wanted the audience to know exactly what they're looking at, which is why the following shot is an even more identifiable image. It's a familiar and standard looking king of spades before we start showing the funkier and more abstract designs later on in the video. Something I learned early on when shooting products is showing scale, and based on the first two shots, it's quite hard to tell how big something like this actually is, which is why I wanted a hand holding the products to appear early on to say, hey, this is what you're looking at. These are all tiny decisions that as an audience member, you're not consciously thinking about, but your brain puts it together. Because otherwise, if you don't do some of these things, you risk starting off confusing the audience and they're just gonna lose interest. I mean, how many times have you watched a YouTube ad pop up and you're looking at it like, I don't know what this is, boring, skip. It's true that the first 5 seconds of an ad is important. I wanted to open with something a bit dramatic with the lighting and the music. When this pops up on someone's feed, I wanted it to stop them in their tracks. And knowing that this was going to be used as a pre-roll ad on YouTube, I wanted a big wow shot right before that skip ad button pops up around the 5-second mark. And that's when we have that quite epic zoom into the deck box shot. And hopefully by that time, the audience is like, all right, this is kind of cool. I'll stick around to see what this is all about. So let's refer back to our checklist. What's the point of this sequence? It was to catch attention and create curiosity, to establish that these are playing cards, but in a way that is so much more high-end and different than you've ever seen. Does it highlight the design? Yes, it's literally front and center. Is it premium? Yep, the lighting and art direction takes care of that. I mean, who else puts this much effort into shooting playing cards? Is it playful? Yep, the movement and camera work, it's all larger than life and flying to the box shot. Dope. Is it ownable? I'd like to think so, but the shots alone could work with other products, but I don't think that easily. Is it delightful? Yes, I don't think anything in this opening sequence is what you'd expect to see when you hear a video about playing cards. Can you pause it and would it still look cool?
Hit it!
Timing and pacing. Aside from writing the goals on a whiteboard, the next thing I do is draw out a timeline. And if it's a 60-second ad like this one, I immediately cut off 10 to 15 seconds for the opening and closing sequence. Because for me, the start and end is always where I begin with concepting. I need to know where I'm starting and where I want to go. Then I can figure out the messy middle parts of how to actually get there. My biggest tip when working to any time limit is to act it out and record it on your phone. It's the easiest way to find out if your idea and messaging fits within that time. When something only lives in your head, it's always longer than you think, and just seeing a crappy recording of yourself going through the motions is enough to see if it's gonna work. In the movies, they call this a pre-vis, which is just a rough draft made of clips or storyboards just to see how it feels. And here's a clip mid-project where I caught myself on camera the moment I came up with an idea for a sequence. I've just come up with an idea for the red wheel sequence where I want to show all the colours of the 4 decks. I kind of wanted to have it in that sort of iPhone-y CG style, but I'm doing it for real. We're going to have a deck, it's going to spin in like, the back designs are going to animate, and then it's going to go to reveal like all the other decks at the back, and it's going to spin back into a fan of cards. In real time, it would probably be around 4 or 5 seconds. I'm guessing it's going to be like this. A little hack way to get pacing, if that's something you're struggling with, is the right music. When I pick a track, I tend to lean for songs that have tempo changes or rhythm changes because it's more interesting and it allows you to punctuate certain moments. That's why for this, I wanted a roller coaster of a song that starts with pace to get your attention. It builds up quickly, but then comes to a pause midway so you can catch your breath, and then it ramps up one more time before the end. You have to spend time with a product or business. When you find out what makes it unique and the little things that make it really cool for a customer, that's when you can create something that's really feels like it's tied to the brand. And your client is going to appreciate that you actually have their best interests in mind, and you might even be given more creative freedom. But that's not really what it's about. What it's about is better work. Because when you care, you can feel it in the final piece. And it's the same thing when you don't care. It seeps into the work, and if you can't tell, the customers definitely can. It's through really caring about the products that you think about the little details, and then you can add in like Easter eggs and little nods and winks that the customer's gonna notice, and it's that makes something really delightful. So I'm really big on ownable content. And what I mean by that is, if you can cover up the logo and replace it with your competitor's logo or products, and it still feels like it would fit or it would work, then that's not ownable. That's kind of my issue with cinematic epic B-roll or slick transitions, which is quite on trend right now, because it ends up being more about the shot or the transition being cool than it is about the product, which means the focus is probably in the wrong place. So for this project, I definitely had an unfair advantage. I've been a playing card nerd for almost, I don't know, 2 decades now. I've never actually said that out loud or thought about how long that actually is, but I've always have a deck of cards nearby or just on hand, so this one was right in my wheelhouse. I like to think I was uniquely qualified for this one, being really familiar with the content. I know the brand well, I know the products well, I'm just on the outskirts of the community enough to know what clicks with a new audience, but still understand what their own audience would think is cool. And a lot of credit has to be given to Artplay here for providing the creative freedom. It doesn't get to this stage from day one with any client, but over the course of projects and showing that you care, you build trust that allows you a bit more flexibility. The feel of this video had to communicate the brand's tone of voice, premium and playful. I've worked with several brands that have a similar tone, and it's always a new challenge because these words mean something slightly different to everyone. And with Art of Play, I saw it as sophisticated play. So it's about finding a way to make it feel fun without being childish or cheesy, because then you lose that premium feeling. And the whole message here is that these are not your average playing cards, so they don't want someone stumbling across their site after watching the ad and be surprised that a deck like this costs $20 as opposed to a crappy deck from the supermarket for like $2. So it had to feel premium immediately. So essentially how I thought about it for this is that the premium comes from the minimal art direction, the set design, and playing with crisp lighting and interesting shadows. These are basically techniques that you might see on other luxury products. Whereas the playful side came from the movement of the camera, the interaction with the products, and the simple but hopefully charming animation. I wanted this ad to be the most delightful thing ever and have someone walk away just smiling. One day I'll rant on why I think everything should be delightful, but the cliff notes basically are because people remember something when they're delighted, and because it feels great to be surprised, and it's just delightful to be delighted. So for me, every shot in this ad had to be delightful in art direction, movement, animation, cinematography, sound design, a combination of everything. So whether it's the floating cards or the animated back designs or something simple like just hearing the birds whistle when the music stops, I wanted it to constantly subvert expectation in some way, and constantly trying to one-up myself almost killed me, but I think it was worth it. Seeing people watch it now that it's been released, you see them lean in more and more and wanting to see what happens next, and then they want to play it again. And if that's not the reaction you want from an ad, I don't know what is. It's always a combination of tiny things that make something great, and I think it's this that separates your work. Sometimes if you want to make magic, it's just about spending more time on something than someone else might possibly imagine. Whether it's communicating that something is premium or luxury or trying to make it delightful, it's all about how much attention to detail have you put in. You can always tell when someone has put in a lot of effort, and it's sometimes hard to put your finger on, but you can just feel it. And you can also intuitively feel when something is off, which brings me to what happened when I broke all the rules. There was only one deleted scene and one change requested from the client, and it came as no surprise to me because I broke the rules on this one shot that didn't follow much of anything that I just told you about in this video. I thought it was quite interesting because the clients didn't know about the rules or the flowchart that I had set out, but they could intuitively feel that something wasn't right, something felt off. So this is the original end shot, and it's decent. It's a pretty standard end of commercial shot, but that's not what we're here to do. I originally put this shot in because I thought it might be a good idea to end on something a bit more typical commercial and have a clear shot of everything with a slower end. But if we look back to my original checklist, what's the point of this sequential shot? It was to show all the different decks, and it does an okay job at that. Does it highlight the design? I mean, yes. Is it premium? Not particularly. Is it playful? Nope. Is it ownable? Definitely not. You could replace everything in the shot for, I don't know, a coffee machine, hairspray, and it would still work just as fine. Is it focused on the product? Well, yes. Is it delightful? Nope. It literally doesn't do anything. And if you hit pause, would it still work as a still image? Yes, but again, it's not that exciting either. It wasn't a significant revision in the final version, but when you see it, it's like, that fits with the rest of the video much better. But again, kudos to Art of Play for not wanting something standard. And this serves as a reminder that even though I am making this video right now, I can still fall into the trap of getting it wrong when I don't follow my own rules. This was just some small insight into the process behind this project, but also how I pretty much approach every project. And even if you work in another medium, I think there's a lot of transferable ideas, and hopefully you found something helpful in this that you can start implementing yourself. I mean, if there's only one thing I'd like you to take away from this, it's probably the first point, which is don't forget the goals. If you got here, thank you for watching. If there's anything else you're interested in hearing about, just let me know. This project was long enough that there's easily enough for a part 2 and part 3. Otherwise, you know how this YouTube thing works. If you like what you see, consider subscribing. There's links and like buttons and all that stuff below. I've been Ka-Lok. I'll see you in the next one.